The 1950s gave us some of the most powerful and stylish cars ever built. These vintage machines weren't just for show, they ruled the drag strips and the streets. Number 12, 1950 Oldsmobile 88 Rocket. Here comes the first star, and it is not shy about showing off. The 1950 Oldsmobile 88 Rocket, a car that made racers grin and rivals frown the moment it touched the track. What made it so special? First, the heart of the car, a shiny V8 engine that had overhead valves. Sounds fancy, right? Back then, most cars were stuck with weaker motors, but the Rocket engine gave you 135 horsepower. For drivers, that felt like strapping fireworks under the hood. It could hit 60 miles per hour in about 13 seconds, which may sound slow today, but in the early 1950s, that was enough speed to make your hat fly off if you forgot to roll down the windows. Now let's talk size. The Olds 88 was not too small and not too heavy. It was just right, like the middle seat on a school bus, close enough to the action but not getting crushed. It was lighter than the bigger Olds 98, which meant racers loved it because the power did not have to drag around extra pounds. Imagine trying to win a race while carrying your entire snack stash versus only one sandwich. The Rocket was the sandwich. Looks also played their part. With a long body of 202 inches and a wide stance over 75 inches, the car had presence on the road. The front carried chrome bumpers that shined like a new toy, and some models even came with a rocket ornament on the hood. Yes, for $5 you could buy yourself a tiny rocket to sit on the nose of your car, which honestly feels like the best $5 you could ever spend in 1950. But here's the fun twist. This car was not only quick at the track, it also became the favorite ride for folks who carried, let's say, very special bottles across country roads late at night. Why? Because the Rocket could outrun just about anything else, and it had a big trunk for plenty of jugs. No one was catching that car, unless they also had a rocket. Spoiler alert, they usually did not. And don't forget comfort. The interior came dressed with pinstriped wool seats that looked sharp and held up well. Doors shut with the kind of clean sound people today try to fake with sound effects. Add wide white wall tires, fender skirts, and even a radio and heater, and you had a ride that felt both classy and quick. A car that could blast down the highway, yet still take grandma to church on Sunday without a fuss. The Rocket did not stop with short races either. Some drivers even used it for trips across thousands of miles, racing one day, then driving it home the next. That showed just how tough and dependable the 88 was. Number 11, 1950 Ford Custom Deluxe Coupe. After the Rocket, another star rolls up with its own flavor, and this one is wearing the name Ford loud and proud. The 1950 Ford Custom Deluxe Club Coupe showed everyone that sometimes the smoothest racers came dressed in simple clothes but carried plenty of muscle underneath. What makes it special starts with a flathead V8 motor. Now, this was no little toy engine. It had 239 cubic inches and made 100 horsepower. That may not sound like a dragon today, but in its time, it was enough to give drivers a grin and plenty of thrills. Add a 3-speed manual with overdrive, and you could stretch that speed without the motor begging for a nap. But let us step back for a moment and look at its body. The shoebox style earned that nickname because the car looked clean and squared, with flat sides and gentle curves that almost gave it a modern look before modern was even cool. A shiny chrome grille up front, and a visor shading the split windshield gave it attitude. And those wide fender skirts at the rear, they made the car look like it wanted to cut through the air and head straight to the finish line. The cabin was no lazy spot either. Wide seats meant plenty of room, and the dash had a single round speedometer with smaller gauges circling it, almost like a wristwatch stretched across the dash. A white steering wheel with little cracks still told stories of long trips. Even though the radio was a bit behind the times, the real soundtrack came from the pipes humming through Flowmaster mufflers. Now here's the cool part that most folks forget. Ford widened its interiors in this year, so the coupe felt like a lounge rolling on wheels. Big windows meant drivers could see everything, which came in handy when you were trying to keep your lead at the track. And the flathead motor had that famous deep hum that racers loved hearing, especially when the car hit high speeds on long straight runs. Underneath, coil springs up front and leaf springs in the back gave it balance. It could cruise smoothly on a Sunday drive, but when you dropped your foot hard, it was ready to play on drag strips or back roads. And just like that, this satin red coupe proved Ford could make a car that looked sharp, felt comfortable, and still raced like it had something to prove. Number 10, 1951 Hudson Hornet. Next up, the fabulous Hudson Hornet, a car that made sure nobody forgot the buzz of its engine. What made it fabulous started with its body. Hudson built the Hornet using what they called a step-down design, which meant the floor was lower between the frame rails. That gave the car a lower center of gravity, and in racing, that is like giving a runner better shoes that grip the track. Suddenly, the Hornet could corner smoother and faster, while other cars were wobbling around trying to keep up. The Hornet did not stop at just looking low and mean. It came with the biggest six-cylinder motor America had ever seen at that time. The H145 engine was a flathead straight six with 308 cubic inches. In normal trim, it made 145 horsepower and 275 pound-feet of torque. Numbers like that meant it could run with the V8 crowd without breaking a sweat. But here's where the fun really kicks in. Hudson offered something called Twin H Power, which meant two carburetors feeding that giant six. The upgrade pushed horsepower up to 170. And that was serious business in the early 1950s. Racers could pull away with a grin, while others wondered how a six-cylinder was leaving their eight-cylinder cars behind. And the Hornet's construction made it feel like a rolling tank with style. Thick steel, strong axles, and heavy-duty parts meant it could take the beating of long races without falling apart. Drivers loved it because it was tough and dependable, and fans loved it because it kept showing up in the winner's circle again and again. Looks also mattered. The Hornet came in coupe, sedan, convertible, and even a pillarless hardtop version. Wide chrome grills and clean trim gave it presence, while the H emblems shouted Hornet pride. Park one on the street and it looked cool. Put one on the track and it looked unstoppable. Now let's add one more layer. With the right tuning, the Hornet could push speeds well above 100 miles per hour, which was enough to make competitors shake their heads. Some even said it felt like the Hornet had wings, even though it never left the ground. Number 9, 1952 Chevrolet Bel Air Coupe. After the Hornet buzzed through the track, another Chevy rolled up. The year was 1952, and the Chevrolet Bel Air Coupe showed the world that drag racing muscle could still come wrapped in class. What made this Chevy so good was the way it balanced looks and power. Instead of being just a car for slow Sunday drives, it carried a heart that racers trusted. At its core lived the stove-bolt six-cylinder engine, 235 cubic inches strong, paired with a Powerglide 2-speed automatic. That might sound simple, but the balance of gearing and torque gave the Bel Air a surprising push off the line. The sound of that motor had a low rumble that always hinted there was more to give, and racers knew they could count on it. The body gave another reason for love. Chevrolet had finally taken a bigger step towards style. A wide chrome grille sat proudly at the front, stretched between bright parking lamps. Trim spears ran along the sides. Rocker guards flashed a little Art Deco charm, and the smooth roofline curved down with grace. Even the rear fender skirts tucked neatly in place, showing off a profile that looked ready to glide forward. Parked next to the competition, the Bel Air Coupe had the presence of a car that belonged in the spotlight. But performance mattered most, and this Chevy did not forget that. The original 3.55 rear gears worked perfectly with the Powerglide, letting the car stay steady at high speeds while still jumping forward when the driver pressed hard. Add in the dependable suspension with independent coils up front and leaf springs in the rear, and suddenly the coupe felt both tough and ready to dance through a race. Four-wheel drum brakes might have smoked after too much pressure, but when tuned right, they still gave reliable stopping power after a strong sprint. Even the interior told its own story. Broad tan and brown leather seats made the cabin feel warm and comfortable, while shiny gauges with chrome trim kept the driver's focus sharp. A large two-tone steering wheel gave full control, and the dash carried a smart mix of radio, knobs, and switches that looked like they belonged on a stylish jukebox. Step into this car, and you knew you were driving something that mixed elegance with attitude. What really built its fame, though, was how well it held together. The frame was heavy-duty, the floor solid, and the driveline could handle constant punishment without giving up. That made the Bel Air Coupe a favorite for long cruises and also a surprise at local strips. Drivers who underestimated it often found themselves staring at its chrome bumper as it pulled away. Number 8, 1953 Buick Roadmaster. From the Chevrolet Bel Air, the story moves to a car that carried more chrome than a diner jukebox, and more swagger than a marching band. The year was 1953, and Buick used its golden anniversary to show off the Roadmaster, a machine that mixed raw drag strength with luxury polish. The Roadmaster did not just look important, it backed up the attitude with brand new technology. This was the year Buick first gave the world its overhead valve, nailhead V8 engine. With 188 horsepower flowing through the smooth Dynaflow automatic transmission, the car had a way of gliding off the line before hitting its stride with steady force. Add hydraulic power steering and power brakes, and suddenly this big cruiser felt surprisingly manageable in a quarter-mile run. What people noticed, even before hearing the motor, was the shape. At the front sat that signature Buick grin of a grille, wide and full of shine. 4 portholes on each fender told everyone this was the top Roadmaster trim, not the smaller supermodel. Chrome strips traced along the body like bright ribbons, while the long wheelbase gave it presence that few cars could match. And yes, those bold curves and heavy trim made competitors look almost plain when parked nearby. Performance did not only come from horsepower. Buick gave this Roadmaster an all-coil suspension paired with a torque tube drive, a design that kept the rear axle tied down tight. It was not a sports car by nature, yet with that V8 growl and plenty of torque, drag racers found ways to push it hard down the strip. The weight meant it stayed planted, and with enough straight road ahead, the car's speed crept higher and higher while the crowd cheered. Now let's talk about the cabin, because racers in the early 50s were not only chasing times, they wanted comfort too. Plush seats covered in fine leather filled the interior, wide enough for friends to ride along and cheer during a local run. The dash sparkled with bright trim and artful gauges, while a large steering wheel gave the driver full command. Radios were becoming more common, and in this Buick, music could join the rumble of the V8 as part of the racing soundtrack. An unusual twist came with the estate wagon version of the Roadmaster. With real white ash wood carefully fitted into its frame, it stood as the very last woody wagon ever built by an American carmaker. Only a few hundred were made, and almost none survive today, which makes the Roadmaster not only a performer, but also a piece of rare history. Imagine pulling up to a drag strip in a woody wagon and still having the power to make rivals nervous. That was the kind of fun only this car could deliver. The Roadmaster showed how Buick's anniversary year brought together speed, luxury, and innovation in one bold package, and its place in racing history is still talked about today. Number 7, 1953 Cadillac Series 62 Coupe. And speaking of American style that makes you grin, the next one brings us straight into Cadillac territory with a machine that knew how to look bold while still running fast. This is the 1953 Cadillac Series 62 Coupe, and it was built at a time when cars were rolling art pieces. The long body was stretched with sharp curves, the front end had those famous Dagmars bumpers sticking out like rocket tips, and the rear cleverly tucked the gas cap behind a taillight. Because why make fueling boring when you can make it feel like a magic trick? That sort of fun detail was Cadillac's way of telling the world, we're fancy, but we also know how to play. The bodywork here was kept smooth with custom touches that cleaned up the trim, but the bright chrome pieces were kept shining. The grille didn't just sit there, it wrapped across the front like a wide smile, and the dual exhaust was neatly tucked into the rear bumper. All of this was finished with a cream paint that sparkled in the sun thanks to a modern clear coat, blending vintage style with a touch of fresh shine. Now let's open the doors, or actually just click a button. This Cadillac had remote door openers that popped with the press on the key fob, which back then felt like science fiction. The cabin was nothing short of a lounge on wheels. Instead of one big bench seat, you had custom leather buckets up front, stitched with chevron patterns, while the back seat was sculpted for style and comfort. The dash was covered with matching saddle leather, and even the old hood ornament got turned into a cool design piece inside. With power windows and a pillarless, hardtop shape, you could roll all the glass down and have a perfect open view while cruising. Of course, Cadillac didn't stop at looks. Under the long hood sat a modern upgrade, a Corvette LT1 V8 engine with fuel injection. That's right, a Corvette heart inside a Cadillac body. The 350 cubic inch motor was dressed up to shine, paired with a smooth 3-speed automatic transmission, plus extra goodies like an aluminum radiator and electric fan. What that meant was not just power, but also dependability, so this car could cruise the highway all day, with cold air conditioning keeping you comfy. So, while the 1953 Cadillac Series 62 looked classy, it also had the muscle to back it up. Number 6, 1954 Chevrolet Corvette C1. And after the Cadillac showed us how class could meet raw power, here comes a car that didn't just turn heads, It kicked off a whole new chapter in American car culture. This is the 1954 Chevrolet Corvette C1, the very first real attempt to make an American sports car. And even though it had a few quirks, it planted the seed for one of the most legendary names in racing history. Just one glance at it, and you see why people gathered around it back in the day. It had a fiberglass body, something no one expected at the time, with curves that made it look like it could cut through the air even when parked. The wide smile-shaped grille with round headlights made it feel playful and futuristic, almost like a show car, brought straight from a dream. Now here's where it gets a little funny. Everyone expected a fire-breathing engine under the hood, but the Corvette C1 in 1954 came with a straight 6 engine that measured 235 cubic inches. It was teamed up with a 2-speed power glide automatic transmission. Yes, you heard that right, an automatic transmission in a car meant to be a sports machine. Some enthusiasts rolled their eyes, but here's the twist. That setup gave the Corvette a smooth personality, one that made it great for cruising. And it was just the beginning because Chevrolet was already planning to add much more power soon after. The colors made this car even more fun. Most rolled out in polo white, but there were also sportsman red, pennant blue, and black. Each one came with a bold interior. Nearly all had bright red seats and panels, while the blue ones got beige trim with a matching beige top. That kind of flair made the Corvette feel like candy on wheels. And back in the 50s, it stood out on the road like nothing else. What really gave the Corvette its identity was timing. American soldiers who had been in Europe during World War II had driven small sports cars like Jaguars, MGs, and Triumphs. When they came home, they wanted something similar, but there was nothing like that made in America. Chevrolet stepped up and said, "Why not us?" That is when the Corvette arrived, bringing a lightweight fiberglass body that was brand new to the industry. It may have leaked a little when it rained and it wasn't the fastest yet, but it had character, and that mattered. Surveys taken in 1954 showed something surprising. Many Corvette owners who had also owned foreign sports cars actually rated the Corvette as better. Some called it equal, while only a small group thought it was worse. That kind of feedback told Chevrolet they were onto something. And soon, with engineers pushing hard, the Corvette would gain its first V8 engine in 1955, transforming it from a stylish cruiser into a machine that could dominate drag strips. So the 1954 Corvette was more than just a pretty car. It was the spark that started a fire. Number 5, 1954 Ford Crestline Sunliner. And just when you think the Corvette had all the attention, here rolls in a Ford that made its own mark in the early 1950s with style and muscle. Say hello to the 1953 Ford Crestline Sunliner, a convertible that showed the world Ford could mix fancy design with serious performance. At first look, the car pulls you in with its long lines and the way the antique white paint makes the pinstriping pop. Add the baby moons with trim rings and the Continental kit out back, and suddenly this Ford feels like it was built to cruise Main Street while still looking ready for the quarter-mile track. Lift the hood, and here comes the part that really wakes up the story. A Ford 302 cubic inch V8 engine sits proud, with an Edelbrock intake and carburetor helping it breathe deep. Spark is kept tight with a Mallory ignition, while a C4 automatic transmission makes sure the power goes down smooth. And for anyone who loves the sound of old-school pipes, the dual custom exhaust ends with FLH fishtails, giving a rumble that is half music, half thunder. But performance is only part of the charm here, because Ford didn't forget comfort. Open the door and you meet a two-tone interior that feels like a time capsule from the 1950s. The bench seat stretches wide, ready for you and your crew, while the pinstriping theme carries inside to tie it all together. Bosch gauges sit in place to keep track of your vitals, oil, temperature, fuel, so you always know what's happening under the hood. And just to make sure this classic keeps up with today, a retro sound AM/FM radio is waiting to play your favorite tunes while you cruise. What made the Crestline special was not just the way it looked or drove, but the way it sat at the top of Ford's line. Between 1952 and 1954, the Crestline was the flagship model, with body styles like the Victoria hardtop, the Country Squire wagon, and of course, this Sunliner convertible. It gave buyers that mix of class and flash that felt just right in the post-war boom years, when America wanted cars that said both fun and freedom. Number 4, 1955 Chrysler C300. Now, Chrysler decided it was time to bring a hammer to the party. This is the 1955 Chrysler C300, a car so bold it became known as the very first real American muscle car. Now, this was no lightweight toy. It stretched more than 18 feet long, carried full luxury seats for 5 people, and yet under the hood it had something that made racers smile. The legendary Hemi Vive 8. With 300 horsepower straight from the factory, this car didn't just look tough. It came with numbers that no other American car had at the time. What made it even more amazing was how Chrysler built it. They borrowed pieces from across their lineup, like a Windsor body, an Imperial front, and New Yorker details. Put it all together, and suddenly you had a car that looked classy enough for a night out, but mean enough for NASCAR. And that is not just talk. In its very first year, the C300 went out and won both the NASCAR championship and the AAA stock car title. That is like showing up to a race with your first ever car and leaving everyone else wondering why they even bothered. Now let's talk speed, because this car had plenty. In testing, C300 hit 60 miles per hour in about 10 seconds, ran the quarter mile in just over 17 seconds at 82 miles per hour, and topped out at nearly 129 miles per hour. For 1955, that was jaw-dropping. Imagine pulling up at the beach in Florida, pointing this car at the sand, and blasting past the competition at Daytona. People had never seen a big luxury coupe move like that before. The interior wasn't forgotten either. It came with big, cushioned seats, rich trim, and all the touches that made Chrysler feel like the king of comfort. This wasn't a stripped-down race car. You could bring your friends, turn up the radio, and still have one of the fastest machines in America under you. That balance of comfort and raw force is what gave the C300 its nickname at the time, the Beautiful Brute. And honestly, that name still fits. And here's the funny part. While little sports cars from Europe were darting around with tiny engines, Chrysler basically said, forget that. We're giving you a massive V8 with style. Sure, a Ferrari could outcorner it, but good luck fitting your family and luggage in one of those. The C300 was a car you could drive to dinner on Friday night and then to the drag strip on Saturday morning without changing a thing. So when people argue about the first muscle car, the C300 has a strong case. It mixed power, luxury, and racing success, all in one package. Number 3, 1956 Chevrolet 210 Sedan. Now comes the 1956 Chevrolet 210 Sedan, a car that proves you did not need the fancy Bel Air badge to make people smile. This machine wore a turquoise and white paint job that turned heads everywhere it rolled. The tail fins reached out like arrows pointing the way forward, and the flying rocket bird hood ornament gave the front a touch of jet-age fun. Chrome bumpers and trim added shine, while Firestone tires wrapped around Chevy hubcaps made sure it kept a strong stance. Even little touches like the fender-mounted antenna and split bench seats showed that Chevrolet knew how to mix good looks with everyday comfort. Under the hood, things were simple but tough. The straight-six engine with a Rochester carburetor might not sound wild today, but back then, it gave drivers plenty of punch for cruising the boulevard or lining up at the drag strip on Friday night. With the column-shifted manual transmission, shifting gears felt like part of the fun. And the single exhaust outlet still let everyone know when this Chevy was coming down the street. For a car in the mid-range, it had enough grit to keep up with plenty of rivals. The interior kept things practical but sharp. Two-tone colors in teal and white gave the cabin character, and the dome light clicked on to show off those clean vinyl seats after dark. Manual crank windows, vent windows, and simple mirrors reminded you that this was a car meant to be driven, not fussed over. The dashboard lighter and ashtray might sound funny today, but in the 50s, they were must-have features, and they gave the dash some extra flair. But here's where things get even more interesting. By the time restorers got their hands on this car, it had received a complete overhaul. The original 235 cubic inch straight six was rebuilt, the paint was refreshed, and the interior was cleaned up with new fabrics and a crisp headliner. Even the door glass and vent windows were redone, showing that someone wanted this Chevy looking sharp from every angle. Underneath, the dry Arizona climate helped preserve the frame, so the foundation stayed strong and rust-free. Later versions of the 210 also carried some surprises. A rebuilt V8 engine with an Edelbrock 4-barrel carburetor and intake gave it real bite, and a TH 353-speed automatic brought smooth shifting to the mix. Pair that with power disc brakes up front and power drums at the rear, and suddenly the 210 could stop with just as much confidence as it could launch. Add in Dynamax mufflers with chrome tips out back, and the soundtrack was as strong as the look. The 210 lived only from 1953 to 1957, replaced later by the Biscayne, but the 1956 version still carries a special charm. It had the wedge-shaped side trim like the Bel Air, but with a simpler painted design that gave it its own identity. It may not have been the top trim, but it showed that sometimes the middle child of the family can steal the show. Number 2. 1956 Lincoln Premier Coupe. Now meet the 1956 Lincoln Premier Coupe, a car that stretched long at 223 inches, and it carried itself with presence everywhere it went. The wide chrome bumpers, bold grille, and clean body lines gave it the kind of look that made competitors nervous. Tail lamps stood tall, the trim sparkled in the sunlight, and Lincoln offered more color choices than an ice cream parlor. 20 single colors and over 32 tone combinations in the very first year alone. Under the hood was the heart that made this car part of drag strip stories. A 368 cubic inch Y-block V, 8-engine, pumped out 285 horsepower, which for the mid-50s was more than enough to make the rear tires cry. The turbo-drive 3-speed automatic transmission sent that power to the rear wheels with smooth confidence. Lincoln engineers wanted the car to move fast, but also stay comfortable. So they paired the V8 with an independent front suspension and a stabilizer bar to keep it steady, even when the pedal went down hard. Open the door and you discover why Lincoln called this the top trim of its line. The cabin was wrapped in premium materials with bold, two-tone themes that matched the era's obsession with style. 4-way power seats came standard, letting the driver settle in perfectly. Power windows were included too, something that felt futuristic at the time. And if you ticked the right option box, air conditioning sent cool air through clear plastic tubes mounted on the rear window shelf, almost like jet aircraft ducts. People in the 50s had never seen anything like it. The Premier was more than just features though. It was about standing out. It shared the same wheelbase and shell as the Capri, but the extra touches made sure you always knew this was the top dog. It even went head-to-head with Cadillac, Packard, and Imperial, showing Lincoln could stand tall in the luxury game. And while its cousin, the Continental Mark II, sat way up on a different price pedestal, the Premier proved you could get high-class looks and strong performance without crossing into the stratosphere. By 1957, Lincoln turned things up again, giving the Premier taller tail fins and headlights that looked like quads before quads were even legal. It looked futuristic, it felt powerful, and with power steering and power brakes now standard, it drove with ease no matter how heavy its presence was. The Lincoln Premier only lasted until 1960. But in that short run, it left a mark as one of the flashiest and most powerful American cars of its time. Number 1. 1958 Plymouth Fury. And finally comes the 1958 Plymouth Fury, a car that looked like it was built to scare traffic right out of the fast lane. Those tail fins stood tall and wide like wings, catching every eye on the street. The quad headlights sat up front with a tube grille that gave the Fury a sharp face, while gold trim stretched across the body to make sure nobody confused it with the plain cars parked nearby. But the real magic of this Fury was the engine hiding under that hood. Plymouth offered the Golden Commando 5.8, a 350 cubic inch monster that could make 305 horsepower, or even 315 if you ticked the rare fuel-injected setup. That meant this car could shoot from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 7.5 seconds, which in the late 50s was jaw-dropping. The quarter mile came in around 16 seconds at close to 90 miles per hour, and this was a car you could pick up straight off the line, no hot rod shop needed. Handling was just as impressive, and here's where Plymouth engineers got clever. Instead of soft coils, the Fury used torsion bar suspension in the front, paired with heavy-duty Oriflow shocks. The result was a ride that felt smooth over dips and humps, but stayed firm when you put your foot down. On twisty mountain roads or long desert highways, the Fury stuck to the pavement with surprising confidence. Pair that with the Sure Grip limited slip rear axle, and you could throw this car into corners without worrying about the tires letting go. The transmission choices kept racers happy too. You could get a 3-speed stick shift with short, sharp gearing, or the 3-speed Torque Flight automatic that shifted smooth but still handled the big torque. Either way, the clutch and driveline were strong enough to take endless drag strip launches without breaking a sweat. Even the brakes showed Plymouth's racing mindset. The Fury carried wide drum brakes with a special total contact design that gave plenty of stopping power for a car that heavy. Add in power steering as an option, and suddenly you had a big car that could feel light and easy even at speed. Which 50s car is your favorite? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more classic car legends.